February 3, 1944, 060 hours. The North Sea is black glass beneath them. 347 men in 42 B-17 flying fortresses climbing through frozen air toward enemy territory. The radio crackles. Compass needles hold steady. Everything is routine. And then, nothing. At 0642, radar screens across England go blank. Not static, not interference, just empty. Like the bombers were swallowed whole. Ground control frantically calls their frequency. Silence. Allied fighters scramble to search the sky. They find nothing. No debris, no distress signals, no enemy engagement reports. 347 men and their machines vanished. For 6 hours and 17 minutes, they simply do not exist. And then, at 12:59, something impossible happens. Radio operators in Berlin pick up American chatter. Confused, panicked voices. Bombers materializing directly over the heart of the Reich, not from the expected approach vector, but from nowhere. Flak guns swing upward in shock as formation after formation drops from clouds that shouldn't contain them. The bombs fall with surgical precision. Factories obliterated, rail yards shattered. The most accurate daylight raid Berlin has seen. But where were they? What happened during those missing hours? Some say science, others say fate. But for one impossible day, time itself went to war. If you love stories hidden behind history's headlines, hit subscribe, because what comes next will rewrite everything you thought you knew about World War II. To understand the impossible, you first need to understand the war these men were fighting. By February 1944, the Allied bombing campaign over Europe was a brutal equation of survival. The 8th Air Force had been hammering German industry for over a year, and the cost was staggering. For every 10 men who climbed into a B-17, statistics said 4 wouldn't come home. Not wounded, gone, disintegrated over the Reich, frozen in the Atlantic, or buried in French fields. The bomber crews knew this. They painted their odds on fuselage nose art. Lucky sevens, grim reapers, desperate prayers to gods and fate. Each mission was a coin flip with death, and Berlin was the worst bet of all. The most heavily defended city on Earth. Thousands of anti-aircraft guns, squadrons of Messerschmitt fighters waiting like wolves. So when the mission briefing came down that February morning, another run to Berlin, the men prepared the way they always did. They wrote letters they hoped no one would read. They checked their Norden bomb sites 3 times. They tested oxygen masks in the frozen pre-dawn. This was their routine, their grim ritual. But what awaited them in the clouds above the North Sea was something no amount of preparation could predict, something that would turn routine into legend. The mission was codenamed Operation Linebacker 3. Target, the Erkner ball bearing factories on Berlin's eastern edge. Intelligence said these facilities were critical to the Nazi war machine. Destroy them and you cripple thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. Lieutenant Colonel James Hartford commanded the lead squadron, 31 years old, Ohio farm boy turned pilot. He'd flown 17 missions over Germany. By bomber crew standards, he was ancient, lucky, or maybe just good. His navigator that morning was Second Lieutenant Michael Reeves, a mathematics prodigy from Boston who could calculate wind drift in his head while enemy fighters screamed past. His bombardier, Captain Frank Kozlowski, had the steadiest hands in the 8th Air Force. His radio operator, Sergeant Tommy Chen, could pick out friendly chatter through static that sounded like hell itself. These men were professionals, the best the United States could field. They lifted off from RAF Bassingbourn at 0534 hours. Standard formation, 3 squadrons, 14 bombers each, stacked in combat boxes designed to maximize defensive firepower. The plan was simple. Cross the North Sea, make landfall over occupied Holland, turn southeast toward Berlin, hit the target, come home. Fighter escort would meet them over the Dutch coast. P-51 Mustangs, fresh from the production lines, with just enough range to shepherd them to the target and back. What could go wrong? Everything, and nothing anyone could have imagined. The oddities began subtly, small things that shouldn't have mattered. At 0621, still over the North Sea, Sergeant Chen noticed something strange about the radio. Not static, something else. A kind of silence underneath the normal chatter, like the frequency was breathing. He mentioned it to Hartford. The pilot checked his instruments. Everything normal. Altimeter, 18,000 feet. Airspeed, 182 knots. Heading, 087 degrees. Compass steady. Then, at 0639, Lieutenant Reeves frowned at his charts. The coastal landmarks should have been visible by now. The Dutch islands, something, but below them, just water. Endless, dark water. "We're off course," Reeves said through the intercom. Hartford glanced at his compass. Still steady. Compass says we're on target. Compass is wrong. That's when the radio went dead. Not crackling static, not German jamming, which had a distinctive metallic howl. Just nothing. Like someone had unplugged the universe. Hartford tried his throat mic. "Ground control, this is Lucky Lady. Do you copy?" Silence. He looked out his cockpit window at the bombers flying beside him in tight formation. They were still there, visible, real. But when he tried to radio them, nothing. And then something happened that Hartford would never be able to adequately explain to the debriefing officers. The clouds changed. Not weather. Not natural. The cloud bank ahead of them began to glow. Faint at first, like dawn light, but wrong. Too green, too uniform. The kind of light that doesn't exist in nature. Hartford's co-pilot, Lieutenant Danny Morrison, whispered, "What the hell is that?" Every pilot in the formation saw it. 42 aircraft, 347 men, all witnessing the same impossible thing. The clouds didn't part. They didn't disperse. They simply opened, like a curtain, like something was inviting them in. Here's what makes this moment crucial to understand. These were not superstitious men. They were engineers, mathematicians, farm boys, trained to trust instruments over instinct. They flew bombers through flak that could shred steel. They watched friends die and kept formation. But every single one of them later reported the same sensation in that moment. A pull. Not physical, not gravity. Something else. An inevitability. Like the sky itself was guiding them forward. Hartford made a decision. The only decision that made sense. We're going through. The formation entered the cloud bank at 0642 hours. Ground radar in England watched them disappear. And for the next 6 hours and 17 minutes, those 42 bombers existed nowhere on Earth that human technology could detect. What happened to them in that cloud? That's where the mystery truly begins. Inside the cloud, time broke. That's the only way the survivors could describe it. Watches stopped, not damaged. Stopped. When Hartford looked at his wrist, the second hand on his military-issue Hamilton sat frozen at 0642 and 37 seconds. The altimeter spun wildly. 18,000 feet, then 12,000, then 24,000. Impossible. The stick was steady. The bomber wasn't climbing or diving, but the instruments screamed contradictions. Reeves, the navigator, stared at his compass. The needle whirled like a roulette wheel. North, south, east, west, no direction, every direction. "We're lost," he said quietly. But they weren't alone in the cloud. Through the glowing green murk, they could see the other bombers. Still in formation, still flying. ghostly shapes keeping perfect distance and heading as if guided by something beyond their own pilots. And the silence, God, the silence. No engine noise. Hartford could see the propellers spinning, could feel vibration through the controls, but heard nothing. The intercom was dead, the radio long dead. Even the roar of wind past the cockpit, gone. It was like flying inside a photograph, a frozen moment, a place where physics took a coffee break and forgot to come back. How long were they in there? The crews couldn't say. Time had no meaning. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours, days, lifetimes. But eventually, the clouds opened again. They emerged into daylight, real daylight, normal sky. Hartford gasped like a drowning man breaking surface. Sound rushed back, the beautiful, deafening roar of 4 Wright Cyclone engines. His watch started again. The compass needle snapped north and held. "Ground control, this is Lucky Lady. Do you copy?" His voice cracked, desperate. Static. Then, "Lucky Lady, who the hell is this?" The accent was wrong. Not English, not American, German. Hartford's blood froze. He looked down through scattered clouds at the landscape below. Rivers, roads, cities, but not the Dutch coast, not even close. He grabbed his map, hands shaking. Reeves was already there, frantically cross-referencing landmarks. "That's the Spree River," Reeves whispered. "And that's... oh, God. What? That's Berlin." They were 400 miles off course, directly over the target they'd been briefed to hit. Except they'd never flown there. They'd been over the North Sea 6... Hartford checked his watch. 6 hours ago. Impossible. Around him, the formation emerged from the clouds in perfect order. 42 bombers appearing from nowhere, like moths from a cocoon. And below them, Berlin lay undefended. No fighters scrambled, no flak guns firing, like they'd arrived before anyone knew they were coming. Hartford made his second decision of the day. "Bombardiers, open bomb bay doors." The German response was chaos. Radar stations across Berlin erupted in confusion. Operators reported impossible contacts, dozens of heavy bombers appearing from empty sky. No approach vector, no warning. Just suddenly there, at 24,000 feet, directly over the city center. Air raid sirens wailed too late. Fighters scrambled too late. Flak batteries swiveled upward in disbelief, trying to track targets that shouldn't exist. In the lead bomber, Captain Kozlowski pressed his eye to the Norden bomb sight, the most sophisticated piece of technology in the U.S. arsenal. A mechanical computer that could calculate wind speed, altitude, drift, and velocity to drop a bomb from 5 miles up into a pickle barrel. He made his calculations, adjusted, steady, steady. Bombs away. The Erkner ball bearing factories appeared in his crosshairs. Clean, perfect. No smoke from earlier raids to obscure vision. No evasive maneuvering throwing off his aim. Just pure, impossible precision. The bombs fell in waves. 42 aircraft releasing their payloads in synchronized sequence. High explosive and incendiary mixed. The German factories below had no time to sound alarms, no time to run. The first bomb hit at 13:03 hours. The building disintegrated in white fire. Then the next, and the next. For 8 minutes, hell rained down on Berlin with an accuracy that Allied bombing had never achieved, would never achieve again. But in the confusion, in the chaos, something else was happening. Messerschmitt fighters arrived, late but furious. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove from altitude, cannon fire stitching the sky. The neat, impossible bombing run dissolved into a dogfight. Ball turret gunners in the B-17s opened fire. Tracers crossed in deadly geometry. A Focke-Wulf exploded in midair. A flying fortress took cannon shells through its wing and spiraled earthward, trailing black smoke. Hartford fought to keep formation. The bombers had dropped their ordnance. Now they had to get home. But where was home? They were 400 miles from where they should be, with no idea how they'd gotten here. "Navigation to pilot," Reeves' voice crackled through the intercom. "I've got a heading, west by northwest. Should take us back to England." "Should?" "I have no idea what happened to us, Jim. I don't know if standard navigation even applies anymore." A Messerschmitt screamed past Hartford's cockpit, so close he could see the pilot's face. Young, terrified, furious. The German fighter rolled and came around for another pass. The waist gunners opened fire. The Messerschmitts shuddered, trailing smoke, but kept coming. This was real. This was normal. Death and fire and fear. These were things they understood. But how they'd gotten here? That remained impossible. And the day's mysteries weren't over yet. The flight back should have taken hours. Standard calculations, 400 miles at 180 knots, meant roughly 2.5 hours of flight time. They made it in 43 minutes. Reeves checked his calculations 3 times, 4 times. The numbers didn't lie, but they made no sense. They'd passed over occupied Holland, crossed the Channel, and were approaching the English coast in less than an hour. "Something's wrong with time," he finally said. "I don't know what, but it's wrong." Hartford didn't argue. His fuel gauges showed impossible readings, too. They'd flown for what felt like hours, dropped bombs, fought fighters, but his tanks were nearly full, like the engines had barely burned anything. The radio crackled to life. "Unidentified aircraft. This is RAF Coastal Command. Identify yourself immediately or we will fire." "This is Lieutenant Colonel James Hartford, U.S. 8th Air Force, returning from Berlin raid." "Berlin? Hartford, our records show your formation disappeared 6 hours ago over the North Sea. We declared you missing and presumed lost." What? "You've been gone since 0642 hours. It's now 1342. Where the hell have you been?" Hartford looked at his watch. It matched. 6 hours. But he'd only experienced, what? An hour of subjective time? "Tower," he said slowly, "we're coming in, and we're going to need a very long debriefing." RAF Bassingbourn, 1430 hours, emergency debriefing. 42 crews, 347 men, all telling the same impossible story. The intelligence officers didn't know what to make of it. Synchronized mass hallucination? Combat fatigue? German psychological warfare? But the evidence was undeniable. The bombers had vanished from radar. The timing matched across all accounts. And reconnaissance photos from Berlin showed the Erkner factories obliterated with pinpoint accuracy that should have been impossible. Lieutenant Reeves presented his navigation logs. Times, headings, fuel consumption, all wrong, all impossible, but consistent across the entire formation. "Gentlemen," said a British officer whose name tag read Whitmore and whose uniform bore no unit insignia, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level." The room went silent. "You're not the first." Hartford felt ice in his chest. What? 3 other formations, smaller, over the past 6 months. Similar disappearances, brief radar blackouts, time discrepancies. Whitmore pulled out files. "We've been investigating, and we believe you encountered something we've been testing." "Testing what?" "We call it Operation Window. Chaff, aluminum strips dropped to confuse radar. But that's the cover story. He paused. The real program is called Project Morpheus. Experimental Magnetic Field Disruption. We've been trying to blind German radar, but the effect is unpredictable. You're saying you did this to us? Hartford's voice was dangerous, quiet. Not intentionally. The field generators were supposed to be deployed over Holland, create a radar shadow for bombers to slip through. But something went wrong. The field intensified, expanded, and when your formation entered it, time stopped. Time bent. We don't fully understand it. The scientists are calling it a temporal magnetic anomaly. The field didn't just block radar, it created a pocket where normal physics didn't apply. You were suspended, untouchable. And when the field collapsed, it deposited you exactly where the navigational trajectory indicated you'd flown straight through. Reeves leaned forward. That's why we appeared over Berlin. The field calculated where we should be after 6 hours of flight and put us there. Essentially, yes. That's impossible. And yet you're sitting here, alive, after being dead for 6 hours. The room absorbed this. 347 men who'd slipped through a crack in reality itself and emerged exactly where they were meant to be. Hartford asked the question everyone was thinking. Can you do it again? Whitmore's expression was grim. We don't know. The equipment was destroyed in the discharge. The scientists are dead. The energy feedback killed them. Project Morpheus died with them. This was an accident, a one-time accident, or fate, someone whispered. But Whitmore was lying. Not about the magnetic field, that part was true, but Project Morpheus wasn't destroyed. It was buried, classified beyond top secret, and hidden in files that wouldn't be declassified for 80 years. Because the scientists weren't dead, they were terrified. Dr. Margaret Chen, lead physicist on Morpheus, had watched her instruments during the experiment. She'd seen the readings spike impossibly high, seen the bombers vanish not just from radar but from existence itself, seen them phase into something that looked like space-time folding in on itself like origami. And she'd seen something else, something in the data that made her blood cold. The field hadn't just moved the bombers through space, it had moved them through probability itself, through alternate timelines, parallel possibilities. In one timeline, the bombers crashed into the sea, all hands lost. In another, they were shot down over Berlin, no survivors. In another, they never took off at all. But in this timeline, this one, singular, impossible timeline, they'd appeared exactly where they needed to be, at exactly the right moment, and survived. The field hadn't just bent time, it had chosen the timeline where the mission succeeded. Dr. Chen buried her findings, burned her notes, and spent the rest of her life wondering, did they navigate the field? Or did something guide them through it? The official report called it a radar malfunction and navigation error. The crews were sworn to secrecy under penalty of court-martial. Their stories were filed away in archives marked "Unexplained Phenomena, No Further Investigation Required." But secrets like this don't stay buried forever. The men who flew through that impossible day carried it with them. Some tried to forget, others couldn't. Lieutenant Reeves spent the rest of his life studying physics, trying to understand what he'd experienced. He never found answers. Hartford flew 17 more missions, survived the war, came home to Ohio, married, had children, and every February 3rd, on the anniversary, he'd look at the sky and wonder. Sergeant Chen, no relation to Dr. Margaret Chen, though the coincidence haunted him, became obsessed with time. He collected clocks, hundreds of them, all stopped at 0642. The Erkner factories never recovered. The bombing raid's precision crippled German ball bearing production for the remainder of the war. Some historians argue that single raid shortened the war by months, saved thousands of lives. But at what cost? What bargain had been struck in that green cloud? What forces had they touched? In 1947, Hartford received a letter. No return address. Inside, a single line in cramped handwriting. "The universe has debts. We paid yours. Don't ask again." He never knew who sent it. He never tried to find out. 80 years later, the files were declassified. Partially. Project Morpheus became a footnote in World War II archives. A failed experiment. A cautionary tale about pushing technology too far. But the men who were there, the few still alive, now in their hundreds, they know better. They'd touched something, briefly, a mechanism in the universe that operates beyond human understanding, a clockwork of cause and effect and probability that occasionally, rarely, intervenes. Was it German magnetic experiments colliding with Allied countermeasures? Was it natural atmospheric phenomena creating a temporal pocket? Was it quantum physics expressing itself at a macro scale? Or was it something else? Something that saw 347 men flying towards certain death and decided, just this once, to rewrite the odds? We'll never know. The scientists are gone. The equipment destroyed or hidden. The truth buried in files that even now remain partially redacted. But on February 3rd every year, aviation enthusiasts and historians gather at RAF Bassingbourn. They stand where the bombers once took off and look at the sky, waiting, wondering. Because somewhere in that winter morning in 1944, 42 bombers slipped through a crack in reality itself and came back with the impossible. Some say it was science. Others say it was fate. But for one impossible day, time itself went to war. Every event, number, and character in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources. In the silence that followed, the sky closed its secrets, and history whispered on. If this story moved you, if it made you question what's possible, share it. Because the greatest mysteries aren't always the ones we solve. Sometimes they're the ones that remind us how much we still don't understand. Hit subscribe for more stories hidden in history's shadows. The truth is waiting.